Hello everyone and welcome to Shipley's webinar on the Capture Manager Playbook. I'm Mallory Price and will monitor today's session. Joining me today are Kedron Dillard, Vice President of Account Development, experienced in early capture activities in both small IT environment and larger professional services company. David Bull, Senior Vice President of Business Winning Services. He oversees all capture and proposal client projects in the U.S. and contributes on major strategic pursuits. And Brad Douglas, Executive Vice President of Global Strategy, who is responsible for large, complex capture efforts and client interface. Thank you to those of you who submitted questions at registration. You helped us shape this webinar to benefit you and help with your needs. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the questions tab in your control panel and we will get to as many as we can. Brad, I will turn the webinar over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mallory. We appreciate you joining today, and we know that you've got a lot of things to do and a lot of things on everybody's plate, but we're glad to have you with us. And let me make sure my screen is sharing. And okay, webinar agenda, here we go. So here's what we're going to cover. And again, David and Kedron, thanks so much for joining us and being willing to share your expertise. Here's what we want to cover based on some of the questions submitted. We wanted to briefly go over typical capture manager roles. By the way, there's a handout in your navigation bar, in your GoToWebinar bar there. You'll notice there's a handout. You're welcome to download, print that off, or download it and have it and keep that. What it is it's a summary, if you will, of what a typical capture manager role is in many organizations. So that's available to you. We'll go through some of the typical goals and milestones for a capture manager as they develop a playbook, game plan, if you will, for a pursuit. Kedron's going to talk to us about opportunity identification and qualification, capture plan development, what should go into a capture plan, a playbook, what are those elements that you don't want to miss or skip over. We'll talk about win strategy as a crucial part of your playbook. And then very important is our interface as we move from capture management into actual proposal development if we are having to put together a proposal, and action planning and execution, which is often obviously the most difficult part of the capture playbook. So let's get started and jump right into capture management roles. But before we do that, I do want to just read and share a couple of questions that were submitted in advance, because these are some of the questions we will be addressing. There was a question: what's the best advice you would give to a company that is just starting out in the federal marketplace? So David, Kedron, and I will try to weave some comments that will help a company that's maybe just starting to penetrate not only a federal market, but maybe a new market, any new market. There was a question about, could you share how to develop a win strategy? We will cover that. How do you figure out the price to win during capture efforts, other than knowing what the customer's budget is? We are not going to delve into price to win in this webinar. We'll touch on it, but we're not going to go into that in detail. That, I think, requires a topic in a webinar in and of itself. There was a question: what are the best practices, tools, / checklists that one should have when doing capture? There will be some information on that for you. How do you take the subjectivity out of calculating the Pwin? Great question. And we will, when we talk about Pwin, we'll try to address that a little bit. And then another question: when the proposal manager should be engaged, and how to manage the transition to the proposal manager leading the RFP response. So we will talk about transitioning from capture to proposal. All right, so here's a list, and we're going to post this on our website, so you'll be able to go back and print this off if you want to review it. We won't go through every line item. But here are some of the typical primary responsibility of a capture manager. So as you're in this role and creating what we call a playbook or a capture plan, these are some of the primary responsibility. Interface with the customer, develop the plan itself, determine discriminators, win strategy, what's our basic notional solution set, actively participate in key decision gates. Some of the more secondary responsibilities might include these types of things. Assist proposal writers and managers in organizing the proposal team. Collaborate on early proposal planning. Work with price, management, technical volume leads. Assist leadership in customer negotiations. Keep leadership informed. That's generally a pretty significant role of a capture manager. So there you see a list of typical roles and responsibilities. And then if we were to kind of condense down into what are the goals? What are the goals of a capture manager in an organization? It might boil down to these 5 things. One is we have to be able to assess our competitive position, and Kedron's going to talk a little bit more about that when we talk about identifying and qualifying opportunities. Another goal is to strengthen our position with the customer, build the customer relationship. Another one, determine what our real discriminators are through careful assessment and analysis, competitive assessment, and so forth. So it's our job as capture manager to not have a bias, for example, on what our discriminators are, but to base that on fact. Develop win themes, our responsibility typically. Establish a go-forward action plan, so a game plan. Those are 5 standard typical responsibilities of a capture manager in developing the capture plan and executing the capture plan. So I hope that's helpful. What I want to do just really quickly, we've got a little poll here, and you'll be able to just do this right on your keyboard, your computer, wherever you're at, your mobile phone. If you would just answer this, just curiosity. We're curious what we've got here, and this is totally anonymous, so we're not going to tell on you. Here's a poll if you would answer this and we get a feel for where everyone's at on this webinar. Go ahead and take a shot at responding to this quick question. Okay, we've got about 86% of you voted, and here are the results that we got. 27% not very well defined, discipline, 29% defined but not followed very well, 22% well defined, routinely followed. 5% of you said strong and well-defined capture discipline. That's great. 16% said I'm not that familiar with capture best practices, and that's fine too. And hopefully this will help. So thank you for doing that and sharing your insight there. Let's go forward now, and I'm going to ask David if David would spend a little bit of time talking about, again, some of the ultimate goals of capture management, what's involved in that, and specifically what are some of the key decision gates and factors that should go into capture planning. So David, if you wouldn't mind walking us through this idea of advancing through becoming more of in a favored position.
typically, capture involves getting to a position where we can be favorable and have a favorable increase in our probability of win. As Brad indicated, and as one of your questions was asked, boy, don't we wish that we could do some exact sciences that would almost guarantee a probability of win. We can't. There's just too many variables, there's too many unknowns, and everybody else is trying to do the same thing we are doing to compete against us. So we have to do it better, and we have to do it more thoroughly. So usually we start in an unknown position, and this can be way, way, way out to the left. I mean, some of the proposals and the stuff that we're working on today were thought about several years ago. The opportunity is so large, the program is so significant, it's a one-of-a-kind, one-off type thing that it was planned on. So we looked at our position, and we may have been unknown, but we at least identified the opportunity. And then what we need to do is through relationships, through research, through participating in market activities, doing whatever it takes to have ourselves and our strategy and our positions and our solutions known, we get out there and we qualify that opportunity, and we assess the competition that we're going to have to compete against. And we also compare that to our known competencies, and should we even be going after this? You'll see a slide in a little while that says we need to evaluate it along each step of the way. Hopefully what we are doing is we are improving our position. We are improving our position both internally. We are giving ourselves the capabilities. We are proving to the world that we have the capability and the capacity. If it's a manufacturing, we should be able to manufacturing. If it's a people or a think tank type environment, we have the people that can do this kind of work. And ultimately our goal is to get in front of the customer and prove and demonstrate to them that we now are in a favored position, so that going forward, instead of not knowing who we are, oh yeah, when this rocket goes up, when this IT solution is needed, when we need to put in this environmental piece, this company has done this in the past, their outcome has been favorable, they have industry leaders and practices, they're a known entity, and so that increases our position to bid and our position to win. And so the remainder of this presentation from Brad and from Kedron and I are going to show you what it takes to get from this unknown position to this favored position. Next, Brad. I wish it was just a single entity, but there's moving parts. For example, we have to develop our solution. And so you're going to have engineers, you're going to have R&D, you're going to have all kinds of people looking at the entire world and the possibilities. And so one of the chapters, if you will, of this playbook will be, what's my solution and what's it going to take and what are the components, and do we manufacture, do we outsource, do we buy, do we partner? The next thing might be the, keep going, Brad. The next thing might be the, keep going, Brad, the brown one. Get them all up. The strategy, what's it going to take to put our strategy in place? We're going to show you a slide here that our strategy has only 4 components, really: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But based on our position in each one of those areas, we will determine, or we will prove, actionable items or actionable plans to go after and determine a strategy to get from point A to point B. That's all a strategy is, folks. It's just a way to get from point A to point B. But again, what's the goal of getting from point A to point B? To improve our probability of winning. Persuasion, we have a sales force, we have account managers, we have people that are interacting with the ultimate customer, and hopefully they have a value proposition that says, when we know and understand through that relationship, the next one, what your needs are, if we are able to resolve those needs, if we are able to meet those needs, if we are able to fix those needs, will our solution be of benefit to you? Of course they're going to say yes, so it becomes our goal, our objective. Our entire strategy in life is to meet those goals, know what they are, and they have to go, folks, they have to go beyond what is stated in Section L in the requirements the RFP. We have to know from a relationship with these decision makers, with the war fighters, if it's a defense contract, with the end users, if it's an IT, if it's the end customer, if it's going to be a healthcare. We need to know what's driving their needs, and when we know that, when we write to that, when we have strategies, when we have a pervasive sales message, our probability of winning goes up, and our capture playbook becomes more complete. Now, one of the questions that somebody asked was, if I'm just beginning, how do I develop a capture mentality and a capture process? It starts with discipline, and it starts with the fact that you know and understand where we are in the business life cycle. Here we determine that there are 6 or 7, depending upon how you evaluate the first phase. But the point is that every step of the way, you have to, it would benefit you to have a defined set of criteria that says, in order to get from, for example, market segmentation, in other words, here's a big market, it might be making airplanes, to long-term positioning. Okay, in the past we've made them with some commercial aviation companies. Now all of a sudden we'd like to go after the big contracts with the Air Force and the Navy. Okay, we have to have decision gates that say, okay, do we have the people? Do we have the resources? Do we have the capital? Do we have the experience? Do we have the past performance that the Navy will place in us to perhaps place an order for $1 billion worth of new aircraft? So the key here, folks, is have a discipline that says at every step of the way, those little gold boxes that you see in the center there, they represent decision gates, and you have to be able to have the right people involved, the key people in your organization. You need to know what your goals and objectives are and what your long-range strategy is, and you mate the two together and you say, okay, are we in a position to go forward based on your specific needs? No one else is yours. And so when you have that criteria, when you have that discipline, you can begin to make those assessments. And then as you get closer to the actual proposal and the result of what your capture plan is, there's several there's several evaluation milestones: a pink team, a red team, a gold team, a green team, and even prior to that, to discuss strategy and discuss how you are felt upon in the neighborhood, if you will, or in the environment. Black Hat will suggest how others view you and how others think your strategy is. So it's all based on the essential milestones and the discipline to execute that. So if you were going to start out, look at ways that you can, instead of going after everything, we have way too much history of companies that say, oh, I bid on 2,000 efforts a day. Well, not a day, that's an exaggeration, but it's so absurd because they have no discipline to say, we should only go after those that we're qualified for, so have the discipline.
David?
Yes.
Quick question, based on what some people submitted as far as discussion points. So as a capture lead, capture manager, I'm looking here at the color team reviews line, okay, the horizontal. As capture manager, I would probably be most intimately involved in that blue team black hat, where it's kind of pre-RFP customer, early customer, right?
Yes, correct, because these two milestones are evaluating your strategy. Blue is more internal as to what you think where you think you should be going and how you should get there. Black Hat is a collection of industry experts or solution experts that will tell you what others think of you, and based on that, if they came back and say, hey, yes, you're headed down the right path, that of course is one strategy to follow, and as a capture manager you would go after that direction. If they come back and say you don't have a chance, or you're perceived as weak, or all your competition is going to bury you, then as a capture manager, and we'll show you how to do this, you're going to have to go out and mitigate, and you're going to have to go out and strengthen that position. It doesn't mean you can't bid, but as a capture manager, it's going to force you to come up with strategies to mitigate what has just been declared a threat. And we'll show you that slide here in a few minutes on what threats are. Doesn't mean you're out of the competition. Just means you need to alter your capture playbook.
Okay, so I kind of just you said this, but I want to maybe reiterate it again based on the question submitted. So for someone entering a new market, maybe they want to enter the federal marketplace. Maybe it's not federal, maybe it's state and local government. Whatever it is, I heard you say, and I want to emphasize, the key is understanding, it's not a one-size-fits-all, and there's certain phases, as we show here, that we have to be prepared to follow. You can't just jump in with both feet and start responding to miscellaneous RFPs. You've got to do all of the long-term positioning. You've got to be very careful in assessing and qualifying opportunities and really position yourself well in advance.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Got to be custom tailored, Brad. Absolutely.
David, if you'll talk a little bit about this term everyone kicks around a lot called Pwin, probability of win.
All right. It is. It's a, boy, don't we wish we could always get that up to 100%. I know of no one that's at 100%. So basically there are 4 C's to a good capture plan. The first one is to know your customer. The C there is the customer. And again, it's not just what comes out in the RFP. That puts you at no greater advantage or disadvantage than everybody else. Where you can leverage or increase your probability of winning is having that relationship with that customer where you know what's driving their needs. So the intimacy at which you know the customer becomes really critical. The second C is the competition. And it's one thing to say, well, this company's going to compete, this company's going to compete, this company's going to compete. That's great. What is their solution? That's the key to understanding your competition. It's just not a matter of who they are, but what are their teammates, and what does that teammate offer as a strength against your strengths, and how is that solution going to be better than yours, and how are you going to mitigate that? So it's key that you know the competition. The third one is kind of a C squared. You get a 2 for here because it's core capabilities. In other words, you can't be just drinking your bath water here, folks. I mean, that's not misused in this case, but you really have to know and understand and be able to apply what you believe are the known capacities and capabilities of your infrastructure, your people, your manufacturing capabilities, your marketing capabilities, and so on and so forth, so that here when this RFP comes out, are you going to be in the ball game, or are you, dead in the water from the very start? And then, of course, like Brad suggested earlier, the 4C, and it's equally as critical almost in all situations. They all say, well, cost is the least important of all the evaluation factors, so on and so forth, but it's still mentioned. And so this is a different time and a different place, but the 4C in a good capture playbook is a whole section on cost and what it's going to take to win. And can you live in that environment? Can you make money, and can you sustain yourself? So those are the factors on what it takes to increase your probability of winning.
Well, and to the question someone asked, how do you take the subjectivity out of it? It's very difficult. And I think the key goes back, David. In fact, someone just now submitted a question. Is the black hat review, is that internal, or is that a purchased or external service provided? I think keeping your Pwin, your probability of winning subjective, goes back to a fair and unbiased competitive and black hat review, to where you've got people in that review that are completely unbiased and they're familiar with your competitors. Some companies do hire outside services to facilitate a black hat review because they bring that external voice, that external unbiased voice, but it doesn't have to be done by external people. It can be people in your own organization, hopefully familiar with competitors or some maybe competitor advantages. But that's how you keep it subjective, is we've got to just filter out the bias and the preference. The capture manager is almost always going to want to bid and push this thing forward. It's our nature. I mean, I've been selling and trying to acquire business, my entire career, and it's just part of my DNA to want to pursue something and go after it. It's not in my DNA to say we shouldn't do it. So we're always fighting against that organizationally. So thank you for that, Dave. That was a good explanation. And just remembering those 4 C's as a critical part of our playbook, our capture playbook, it's an easy way to do that. Remember those. All right. Kedron's had a lot of experience in fact, she, in a previous employment opportunity she actually helped a company penetrate the federal marketplace from being pretty non-existent in that space to being a player and getting involved and winning some contracts. So she brings actual on-the-ground practitioner expertise in learning how to identify and qualify opportunities in different environments. So I've asked Kedron if she'd spend a little bit of time walking us through some of the tricks and tips and best practices of identifying and qualifying opportunities. So Kedron, would you walk us through some of this?
Absolutely, delighted to. Hello, everyone. As capture managers, and David mentioned it earlier, our core objective is going from an unfavored or an unknown position to a favored position, from point A to point B. And the beauty of that is that we have a variety of sources, right, to qualify, to vet, to research opportunities, to ascertain who are the players, who are the key decision makers. And you'll see some of those listed here, right? Relationships, it goes without saying. Authentic relationships, should be kind of the driving force. You teaming with your salesperson to leverage existing relationships should be the driving force when you are in the midst of trying to make a pursuit decision, and even in that interim period. I've used relationships that I've trusted and that I've nurtured to even ask them, how are we viewed? How is our you? Can you tell me a little bit about, how our competition is selling their products, so that I can, and granted, they don't unveil, too much, but key relationships are critical, as it pertains to competitive intelligence, which we'll talk about more in a moment, but just as well as fleshing out the details of a pursuit decision. News and websites, annual reports. I've leveraged transcripts from annual reports, both again from my competition and for my potential client or who we are selling to try to just get more texture, to understand what the hot buttons are that they might not be articulating to myself or the sales folks, but that we can kind of provide some detail or some granularity there. Marketing and events up in the top right-hand corner, planning ahead of different events, ahead of different trade shows. What are my objectives? Who do I want to meet? What are kind of the key points that I want to get across to the people that I meet at those at said events? And what is my follow-up action plan? Who am I going to try to connect with afterwards? Who are part of the, kind of the puzzle that I didn't know about prior to meeting them. And finally, prospecting and networking. So this kind of goes without saying, but there are many opportunities out there to help flesh out what the capture plan could be and what validation points that you might need to support a pursuit decision. So to qualify the opportunity, and I think we can all relate to getting so into so potentially lost in the granularity of decisions and deals that we forget to ask ourselves kind of frequently, and fundamentally, what is it? What are we solving for? What is the potential customer solving for, right? And I do think, and I've had experience of both asking myself that in the beginning of my capture duties, if you will, and not asking it enough, because it can change. It can change as we are, as we get more details from the potential client, as we flesh out what our solution might be. So frequently asking yourself, what is it? Is it a real issue that we're solving? Is it something that we can solve? Can we provide for it? Further, will the customer buy from us? Is there an incumbent? So all of these different questions. Do we potentially have, is it funded? Do we have the budget to, or is the budget in line with what we would offer our product or solution for? So this is something that I would, kind of have posted against at my desk or against my wall, so that, I could frequently ask myself these types of questions, just to ensure that, A, from an internal perspective, I had these answers, at a drop of a hat if I were asked, but also to ensure that I am staying sharp and staying above, kind of the fray, if you will, of the pursuit decision, that they were always, the answers were always top of mind.
So, Kedren, I would kind of linking this to what David was talking about, in the Pwin calculation and everything. I think to the extent that we as capture managers or our capture manager on a pursuit cannot answer these types of questions, to me, the probability of win goes down.
Sure. You're right.
In
exactly.
relation to that.
Great point. Exactly. It's a story there if you can't answer the questions. You're exactly right. That's telling within itself or of itself. From an inward perspective, internal perspective, having an opportunity funnel like this set up is helpful as well. So what is as a capture manager, what is my organization's market fit? What are the markets that we're going to go after, or that we are going after? And then as a level down from that, okay, we have our markets. What is the strategy? So within those markets, what are the strategic opportunities that will align with our trajectory, right, that we have in place going forward? And does the opportunity fit that, right? Where does this opportunity potentially fit within our sales pipeline, within the, what we have forecasted, from a pipeline perspective for, the rest of the year or the rest of the quarter? And again, our competitive position, can we, going back to Pwin, what is our probability against the competition, juxtaposing what we think the competition, how they will position themselves, what is our probability of winning? And all of that falls into our pursuit decision. Knowing the decision makers, we talked a little bit. Please, go ahead, Brad.
Sorry, Kedren. So you framed that really well, that's an internal discipline. Back to, the word discipline that we need to do is work through our pipeline, our qualification gates, and so forth. And then we get to kind of more of this customer interface, human interaction. So I look forward to hearing your tips here on the customer interface.
Absolutely. We talked about relationships and the importance of relationships earlier, right? And this is, echoing that. Who are the influencers and who are the key decision makers? And I would even argue that is the aggregate view. That's the first layer of understanding, right? What you want to do beyond that is to understand what role these key influencers and decision makers have within the buying decision, within the pursuit, within the opportunity. So who is the financial buyer? Who is the technical user of the solution or of the product that we're putting forward? Who is the leadership stakeholder? Who are the leadership stakeholders associated with the opportunity? And what are their specific hot buttons? You might have 3 technical buyers, but they might have 3 very distinct and very different hot buttons associated with why this is an opportunity within itself, right? And so how would you define that? And I would even say tracking, has their hot buttons changed over the course of your research and you being associated and fulfilling the capture duties of this role, right, or of this opportunity. Get to know them on social, get to know them outside of kind of this opportunity, understand, leverage social media, leverage your networking opportunities. There was a capture opportunity that I even set up Google Alerts, for both the opportunity and the leadership stakeholders associated with the deal. And granted, that's not something that's going to give you data, or hits repeatedly throughout the day, but you'd be surprised the one or two times during this kind of 9-month capture decision that we had, when we did get alerts from various sources, very industry-specific sources, we were able to map that or kind of flesh that back into, our overarching plan, and it was helpful. It at least kind of gave us a direction to research that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
Kedron, we got a question which leads us actually to the next C in the 4 C's of Pwin, competitor. The question was, do you have a way of knowing who competitors are? We often don't know and have to guess unless we see after the fact who they were. So this is not uncommon. Sometimes we're in an industry where competitors are unknown. And I would say, it sounds simple, but it just takes good old-fashioned sleuthing and snooping sometimes. And I will also say sometimes we won't know. Sometimes what we have to do is we have to just look at companies that are offering similar services in the similar market and assume they're bidding. Sometimes we can make up a fictitious competitor and say, well, let's just create a company, ABC, and assume they're bidding and compete against them. So there's no easy answer to that question, but Kedron, if you'd address this C in Pwin, the competitor, that would be fantastic now as related to this question.
Absolutely, and that is a great segue. Thank you. I also leveraged my relationships, as I mentioned, and granted, it takes a very specific relationship that you can ask the question, who else are you talking to? Who else is in here trying to sell this particular solution or product to, but I can, count often how many times that there would be a small competitor that wasn't on our radar just yet that came out of that competition, right? So starting in the middle here, what is the competitor strategy, right? So what are their vulnerabilities? How do they view themselves? How would they position themselves with the competitor list that you know of, obviously? What is their current position in the marketplace? How would they sell against us? What do we think that they're saying to our competition about us and about our service or particular product? And going to current strategy in the top right, what do they do? How often potentially have they changed their position or their product? What are their future goals? Are they into new markets? Are they branching out to new markets? Have they kind of condensed or kind of scaled back by way of where and how they were marketing themselves? From an assumption perspective, what do we think that they assume about the industry? How do they feel as though the market views them from an external perspective, and then your typical strengths and weaknesses from a capabilities view. So if we can answer as a capture manager, if we can try to answer with the known competition that we have, right, these questions, it's beyond helpful in your supporting your pursuit decision. This is another checklist that I had posted on my desk when I was doing capture, and would revisit these questions quite often, right? So and some of them we've already touched on, right? Does the opportunity, require teaming? That's another one that typically, it's a very, I won't say obvious, but some would argue, kind of a question at the forefront, but it might get lost in the shuffle as you get into the weeds and the details of the pursuit decision. But I think it's fair. Like, what does the team look like? If and when we win the business, what does that what would it take to fulfill the opportunity? Do we know who the key decision makers are? We talked about that, and their specific hot buttons, and how they relate to the decision, what their role will be in the particular decision. Do the key customer stakeholders know us? What's our relationship like with the stakeholders? Are they familiar with our solution? Have we established a price to compete? As Brad stated, that's not something we'll go into detail here in this webinar, but ensure that we have that dialogue internally. Do we have a price to compete? Do we understand what the win strategies are from a pricing perspective is critical.
Fantastic, thank you. And that is really good checklist. And those are helpful. Those are helpful reminders of what we need to be doing. Thank you so much for that. That really was a good explanation of those 4 C's that go into Pwin, which ought to be the core. It really needs to be the core of a capture plan and a capture playbook. So let's talk about the actual development of this. And for those of you, a lot of you don't know me, the whole reason we're using Playbook is because I'm a sports junkie. And so I like to think of everything as a competition, and so thus the Playbook. We can call it a plan, we can call it whatever we want, but in this case we're calling it a Capture Manager Playbook, something we ought to game plan for as we go after opportunities. So why should we do this? Why should we develop a capture plan playbook or plan itself? And some of you, we did have a question come in just now. Some of you are proposal managers that have to wear the capture manager hat. We understand that a lot of organizations don't have dedicated capture managers per se. It's the proposal manager that has to do some of this strategic thinking. So whether you have the luxury of having dedicated capture managers or not, someone needs to be taking care of this work, this capture activity, this capture work. And here's why. Because it strengthens your organizational thinking. It does impose discipline. It helps build consensus on pursuits. What should we be pursuing? On teaming partners. We need this playbook. It transfers information from our sales team, our sales force, or BD team to the proposal, the people that actually have to create the message. A playbook will help us identify gaps in our win strategy if we have gaps and weaknesses that we need to resolve, and our capabilities. I promise you, if done well and monitored and managed, it does save money. It reduces a lot of redundancy and waste and rework, and it ultimately leads to winning more business in a more efficient way. So if your leadership wants to know why in the world would we focus on this phase of business development, this capture phase, these are some good talking points for you. What should be in your playbook? All right, here are the elements. You need an opportunity overview. We need to just state briefly, here's the opportunity, here's the customer. We need a customer overview. Here's what we know about them. Here's what we don't know. We need to go find out. We need a competitor assessment, and Kedron talked all about that. And we need to know, when possible, who we're competing with. David talked about the C being capabilities, internal capabilities. Where are we strong, weak? Where do we have gaps? We need to then assess ourselves against competitors and vice versa. That we need to do a bidder comparison to know where we stand. A win strategy. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. How are we strategically positioning with this customer? Very important in our playbook is this idea of an action plan. Unfortunately, a lot of companies fall short here. We develop the plan, but we don't execute. And so these are the elements, if you will, that should be part of your capture playbook action plan, and it should have a schedule. There should be dates, milestones, and names associated with the action plan. Very briefly, really 4 things to remember when developing your playbook. Obviously, we need to gather information, populate. We need to go out and research and gather information from all those sources Kedron talked about. Then we need to validate it. It's iterative. It may change, something politically might change the whole landscape of this pursuit, and we got to validate any information we've gathered. We've got to update that, make it visible for people, of course, as I mentioned, implement. So those are kind of 4 iterative steps of capture planning, developing a playbook that we need to be thinking about. All right, a big question, and some of you mentioned this in registering for this webinar, and thank you for that, is how do we really develop this win strategy? And I know we've covered some of this in previous webinars, but boy, it goes to the heart not only of capture planning, but proposal planning and proposal execution. So David, if you wouldn't mind walking us through briefly the what goes into actually developing a win strategy in the mind of a capture manager.
All right, first we have to know and understand just 3 basic terms. What are the issues? Every RFP is issued because there are issues that we need to have resolved. So that's the underlying principles of every RFP. All right, what's going to motivate the customer to move and act upon? Those are typically the motivators. They're either going to reduce costs, they're going to improve efficiency, they're going to make somebody's life easier, they're going to protect the warfighter. Those are the motivators. And then the final one, that the key that we need to focus on that will develop all strategies against are what are the hot buttons? And the hot buttons are a consolidation of both the motivators and the issues that, and to paraphrase, keeps our customer awake at night. If we can resolve those hot buttons, if we know those hot buttons better than our competition and then can write to them, I assure you, you will increase your probability of winning. So, folks, this is it. I mean, if there's one slide in here that I will argue with anybody, I will debate with anybody, I will stand firm on, there's only 4 areas that a strategy can come from. 4 and only 4. Not 3, not 2, not 5, not 6. There are 4. The first area, we have all this information from, what Kendra Brad has talked about. We developed our 4 C's. We have this capture intelligence. What do we do with it? We have to take it forward. We have to develop a message that we can hand off to our proposal team so that they, in fact, can write a compelling, winning proposal. Where do those strategies come from? They come from our strengths. These are our positive things that we do better than anybody else. And so we typically start this strategy off by saying we will leverage our strengths by doing something. There is an actionable demand right there. What are we going to do with our strengths? How are we going to describe? How are we going to posture? How are we going to tell our strengths so that there is no doubt left in anybody's mind that we are the very best at what we do? All right, we're not going to be strong in all categories. We are going to have weaknesses. Here is the second area where our strategy must come from, because I assure you that to posture themselves better than us, our competition will in fact leverage their strength against our weaknesses. So we need to know what our weaknesses are, and we need to have an actionable plan that we describe in our proposal that says, here is how we will address those weaknesses. We plan on hiring this company. We plan on using this new technology. We plan on bringing in these people as consultants, whatever it takes, but we must address weaknesses, because if we don't and our competition does, it'll suggest that we are not being totally forthright with our solution, and therefore we will look as weak. The third area that every strategy comes from is opportunities. Here's a way by saying, hey, we have done this in the past. We are strong in this area. We have all kinds of relevant past performances. none of our competition can do this as well as proven by, and here's a chance to, brag on ourselves and ghost our competition. But by suggesting that, these opportunities are right in our sweet spot, again, we suggest that the strategies that we will use to get there are based on typically past performance, and we know and have done this before, and we do it very well. And then the final area that our strategies come from, and like I say, folks, it's just from all four of these areas, no more, no less, threats. And again, those are where our competition, again, will say, hey, we have proven over and over again that we have the best this, the fastest that, the most complete this, the strongest people here, and no one else can match us. And that may be true, but we're going to have to come up with some kind of strategy to say, okay, what are we going to do to mitigate that? And if we can't, why are we proposing? That would be back there in the in those decision gates and say, boy, if we can't overcome this person, this team's, this individual's competitive position, and we can't do it at a competitive price that allows us to be favorable, why do it? And so the only other thing that comes into play in these four areas is on the next slide, you'll see a fifth little button, and that's called focus on your discriminators. So again, all four, and please take this away as this is so powerful. Your strategies, if you're going to develop strategies, they only come from one of four areas. They come from leveraging our strengths. What are we good at? We have to acknowledge and mitigate our weaknesses so that we don't look like we can't do it from our customers' perspectives. We have to neutralize their strengths. If we can't, why would we be in the competition? Why would the customer select us if we can't suggest that we're at least equal to our competitor? And finally, we have to leverage and do the same thing to our competitors. We have to say, hey, what about this? They failed in this regard, or they just don't have this capacity, or they just don't have this capability. And then show through discriminators things that elevate our positions, things that show us that we stand out, show us things that we have that no one else does. We may have a rocket that can get to outer Earth orbit where no one else does. We may have a chip in our computers that has 5 times the storage and 5 times the speed as the next available competitor. These are discriminators that posture us in front of our competition. Leverage those, use those in conjunction with those 4, SWOT parameters, and all of your, not part of, all of your strategies will come from one of those 4 elements. Here's the inputs. We talked about this earlier. Brad came up, Brad pointed this out. A blue team and a black team are done, as key elements to a capture plan. Why? Because they help enforce our capture strategy, or they help us understand perhaps weaknesses. So here's the inputs. On the left there, the description, the solution, what it's going to take to win, early phase action, all of those go into a plan. And this plan is evaluated. The very formal name for this is a blue team review. It's an internal review. You call a meeting for a basic day and you go over every single one of your strategies and the overarching elements of the plan. And your output is strengths, weaknesses, and gaps, recommended solution for enhancements. What if you do have some weaknesses? Are you done? No. Just means you're going to have to mitigate and come up with a different solution. We all agree upon a win strategy so that, like, Brad said, when we begin to do this early, we start off at a much stronger position, and down the road it decreases the amount of rewrites and wasted time. So it does, create a much more cost-efficient way and a higher, greater quality. Here's this checklist. You can read it. Now, here's the point that we just have to validate. If the answer to any one of these questions is a no, are we done? Well, we could say that. That's a discipline that says, boy, do we know the competitor's perception? Do we know the customer's perception of competitors? And if it's much stronger than us, do we quit? Well, maybe we should if it's that strong and we don't have a chance. If we're not the incumbent and they love the incumbent and the incumbent's got incredibly high CPAR, should we bow out and not waste our time and money? Maybe. What this does say, though, is if we say no to any of these, if we think we should still be in the game, our capture playbook says now we have to go mitigate and we have to go find a solution. So we take every aspect of good capture planning and we apply it to whatever it takes to come up with a way to overcome the no to turn it to a yes. Every single one of these has to be a yes, ideally. Not really actually, but ideally for us to go forward. So, good checklist.
Perfect, David. Thank you for that. Again, can't stress enough, the whole win strategy is really at the core of everything we're doing when it comes to capture. So just a few minutes then left, and we want to talk about developing, executing this playbook and the action plan. You've seen this before, and we can't stress enough. It's these final two parts of the playbook that are the most difficult and sometimes, unfortunately, the most overlooked, and that is action planning and execution. So when it comes to game planning, and back to my sports, we have to, along the way, what exactly do we want done when we're going through this pre-RFP capture planning phase? What do we need done? When does it have to be done? And how is it going to get done? Do we have to go do demos with the customer? Do we have to attend bidder conferences, industry days? And who's going to do it? If we answer these 4 questions with our action plan, we're going to be okay. But it's iterative. It keeps changing and updating. What has to be done, when, how are we going to do it, and who's going to do it? This is what we need to get better at tracking in our action plan. So these are, we talk about contingent, or what types of plans go into the action plan. Well, someone's got to be responsible for gathering intelligence and collection. However you do that. If you do it in a PowerPoint slide, if you do it on your CRM system, on a SharePoint site, in a Word document, it doesn't matter. But someone's got to be in charge of intelligence collection. Solution development plan. Who's working on that? Well, we talk to the customer and create our strategy. What about contingency plans? What if this thing gets delayed by 6 months? Now what? What are we going to do then? What if for some reason it gets accelerated? What if it goes from a full and open competition to more of a OTA type of acquisition, which we have seen happen? And then finally, a customer call plan. These are all plans or parts of an action plan that need to be established. Okay, supporting the proposal. That's a whole separate probably topic, but here's going back to what David said, the win strategy. An exercise we ought to be doing as capture managers is just creating, these aren't statements that go in the proposal. These are just mental statements we need to be thinking about. David talks about leveraging our strength as one of the key 5 parts of a win strategy. So just think through this in our mind, or on paper, or as a group exercise. We will leverage our strength, and let's say we have a strength in meeting deadlines. Our past performance shows that we meet every deadline on every project. All right, wishful thinking, but let's leverage our strength in meeting deadlines by providing 3 past performance examples to achieve customer confidence and improve our credibility with this customer. So just we will do something by what to achieve what. Just simple strategy statements, helps us focus on the hot buttons, reminds us of our discriminators, and boy, will this be a huge help to proposal people. If you can help the proposal team leverage your strengths, mitigate weaknesses, you're off and running. So again, thank you for your time today and investing an hour with us. We hope this has been helpful. It'll be posted on our website, including a replay of the webinar. But we've talked about capture manager roles, key milestones, and decision gates. We've talked about, Kedren shared with us some tips on identifying and qualifying opportunities. We've talked about the playbook itself, developing that capture plan, that capture playbook. David went through win strategy development with us. And then one of the key things we can do as capture managers to provide proposal support, two things: stay engaged and help the proposal team understand the win strategy. What is our win strategy? And then, of course, we talked about the importance of action planning and execution. So in summary, if we were to distill all of this down into something very, very simple, it's this. We've got to go through some competitor analysis. We've got to understand the customer analysis, develop a capture strategy, and execute the action plan. So if we wanted to talk about the capture playbook simplified, there's a very simple diagram. All right, one last question we're going to address. Someone asked the question just now, is internal stakeholder force field analysis part of capture management? Is it an essential part of capture management? Absolutely. We have to be thinking about our internal stakeholders on this. Our leadership team, our technical team, our SMEs, because they have to have a say. They have to be part of our decision gates on whether we go forward with our bid or no bid. So yes, internal stakeholders and their input, their opinions are absolutely a necessary part of this. That's a great question, and thank you for asking that. Again, thank you. There's our email addresses. We'd be happy to field questions. Please download that handout if you haven't already, describing the capture manager roles, responsibilities. And we appreciate your time. Kedren and David, Mallory, thank you so much. And take care. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Brad.